and ended up being fueled by an unwavering belief that the value of the men I now live with. Men, some of whom I physically put into prison, now took care of me better than my own family. It was during this time, forming deep connections with fellow inmates, that I heard stories of being discarded. Their stories revealed a lifetime of marginalization, stemming from youthful convictions for minor drug offenses. They shared tales of addiction, untreated mental illness, and a desperate struggle for acceptance, to be heard. This project is podcast.
Welcome to the Scared People Project here. Doing kind of like my podcast format, but basically live now for a lot of these.
Their potential.
With the big goal is just kind of the theme and just get everyone interested in and kind of aware of what I do on the podcast and what the ultimate goal is.
Like last year's cell phone.
Ending some of the systems out there that are doing us no harm, including
war on drugs,
the mass incarceration,
my story
usually fueled by the war on drugs, and
to a zealot for change.
Improving our mental health systems, because we're using prisons and law enforcement as a catch-all for that. The reason I'm someone who talk about this is I was a cop for 13 years. I was actually in law enforcement for almost 20, though. Started as a little explorer when I was 14, and all the way till I was 33.
Ability to support others in crisis.
When I unceremoniously left law enforcement and was convicted of a felony that I did not commit. That being a side issue, I did the unthinkable, and I chose actually to go to the main line, which is that general population and kind of prison nomenclature. So instead of
them that they're past,
just going into what they call protective custody or PCing up, actually went and did the unheard of and was a regular member prison population. That meant going for the prison culture rules, not just rules and regulations that the COs have for you.
Encourage them to embrace their own potential.
It's really be able to be accepted
by the
world. Your fellow convicts, so to speak.
This journey of resilience.
So I did that.
With the scarred to become the saviors.
A series of different events, and that's what we're talking about in the upcoming podcast episode. Why that happened? Why was I in that unique situation where I could, walk a main line in something that a cop had never done before, and
the hidden stories
that would have survived.
Highlight the damages done
in any other situation. So the next few episodes are going to be with two of my recent friends. They're a big reason why I was able to walk the main line and be
now a man with absolute clarity.
Both Dave and Mike, and they both have very interesting stories. Talking about
discuss the failures of and the need for the
super successful. One of the biggest drug dealers in the state of Washington at one point.
As well as the need to reform our mental health systems.
He was also an Iraq War veteran, the first war, Gulf War. And, what that how did he lead to there? And why is he the number one person that allowed me to get in prison? Of all things, someone who was a huge drug dealer, gang member, been to prison for almost 22 years at that point. His best friend ends up being the ex-cop in prison. Another one's a very acclaimed author, published journalist, who he and I end up collaborating, of all things. Someone raised in the system, very much raised in the system, and I end up collaborating and doing some really cool stuff with article-wise, and then become one of my really, really good friends. And you'll hear about those in the upcoming episodes of the podcast. But tonight, in kind of the Obscuring series, every time I decide to go live on here, I'm going to talk about the war on drugs. Because that is one of the biggest reasons why there's hate towards law enforcement. There is the whole reason we have these calls for police reform and all that, the bad blood that there is between both law enforcement and, just the regular population is mostly due to the war on drugs. And then the police actions that happen because of that, the bristling response that most people have because of the war on drugs is towards law enforcement, that violence, that aggression towards law enforcement, all most of it based on war on drugs. That's what's wrong with American policing. It's wrong with a lot of stuff in society. It's the reason why we have such a bad fentanyl overdose problem, and our friends and family, loved ones dying on a daily basis due to fentanyl is due to the mismanagement of the war on drugs. So why is that? So first off, just have to go back to Prohibition and look. It's not that it doesn't take a genius to look that you have extreme amounts of violence when you have a illicit product. You can't just go call up the police when someone is going to rip you of your drugs. No, you just became an outlaw. You became outside the protection of law. And so now violence is the only thing that can do it. Violence is the answer, unfortunately, in the illicit trade of anything, whether it's drugs, sex, stolen goods, anything along those lines is all going to have to be answered with violence. Because you don't, then you get reputation, matters so much, you become a bitch or something, so to speak. And now you are fair game. It's open season on you if you don't use violence to protect your little illicit enterprise. So that being said, violence becomes a big issue. Now when you have a criminal enterprise that's more violent, you now have a law enforcement group that has to become more violent. So the reason law enforcement has become more violent. Now, I don't use the term militarization of police. Maybe it's just because my whole time that's one of the things that I've kind of roll my eyes, because it's not militarization. There's actually a lot more police tactics used in the military than vice versa. But it is violence towards society, violence towards citizens, and the differentiation from going from being a protector role into being a combatant against your society really started with the war on drugs. Instead of the officer friendly, your neighborhood officer, people being happy to see a police officer in their neighborhood, especially in neighborhoods that don't have such high incomes, especially in those neighborhoods, where it's maybe a little tanner complexion than the officers patrolling it. Saw a lot more violence towards them than prior to the war on drugs. That's not saying racism also appeared, we know that's not true, but the fact of having it be cops versus citizens is all due to the war on drugs and the kind of police tactics that are encouraged and used. Because again, we've got a more violent group of people. Now, police are going to try and be more violent towards it. And then there's the old, start getting a bunch of toys out there, be a bunch of tools. When everything starts looking like a nail, when you have a hammer, that sort of cliche term becomes true. You won't believe how many times when something like new came out, like a taser, then now all of a sudden it's like, oh, everyone's tasing people. When the lateral vascular neck restraint became allowed again, and now not allowed in most agencies, there was like almost competition to see who could get doing it first. So, yeah, remember, they're human beings. You're doing that. You all boredom. Even if you're busy, there's a lot of mundane, repetitive things in law enforcement, and something new comes up, everyone wants to try and do it. So that is one of the reasons there. So if anyone has any questions as this comes up, feel free to shoot those up on there. Appreciate anyone who contributes, because that certainly helps this stuff going. So talked a little bit about violence. You have violence being one, and then you have just police battling against them. The other reason you see that kind of police versus people coming up is because drugs are the one unique thing that cops go look for. That is drug enforcement. Most other crimes, kind of like firefighters in the sense of you don't drive firefighters don't go around driving looking for a fire. There's all other crimes you're not looking for. Yeah, if you have a series of bank robberies, you might have some task force, or you might have some guys plain clothes sitting around doing some surveillance, and if you know that's happening. But for the most part, you're not just sitting on a bank all day hoping it gets robbed. There's so few far in between. Same thing with burglaries. Yeah, you might do some extra patrols and stuff, but you don't know what house is about to get burgled. Drugs on the other hand, you can go look for drugs because you kind of know what people drive those cars or what people do that are in that in the game, so to speak. There's also the fact that drugs are unique as far as prosecution. It's really easy to prosecute drugs because there's what they call per se limit, by law limit, which is there's no limit. You can't have anything. We're talking about, let's talk about like the opiates and methamphetamines and cocaine and that kind of stuff, not the marijuana and prescription stuff. Just kind of focus on the true street drugs, because we can get into some nuances or technicalities even when we want to start talking about some of that stuff. So absent all that stuff, if we just talk about the basic stuff, we have a DEA scheduling system. You hear something's a Schedule 1 narcotic, or hear something Schedule 2, 3, 4, all that kind of stuff is based on DEA scheduling. Now, it's boring, you don't have to get into all that, but what it does set a limit of is anything. If you have any of those in your system, you are, or not your system, I'm sorry, in your possession, we're not talking about ingestion, it's illegal. So it's really easy to prosecute. All you have to do is say this person had it and it's illegal. So that's why I have to do a little field test. Has it? Cool. Now you got probable cause. And so now they can arrest and try and prosecute the person for it. But all you have to do to prove it, again, is just the fact that it was illegal. So they send it to a lab and it comes back, and now it's just a matter of defending whether the police had a legal right to go in the pockets or not, or go in the center console, go in the backpack, whatever it may be. That's the argument. So that's why most Fourth Amendment case law comes from drug enforcement. But it's really pretty easy. you had it, boom, easy. Now, like a theft, you have to prove state of mind. Possession of stolen property, it's like, okay, did the person know that they were in possession of it? Would a reasonable person have known it was illegal? There's all kinds of different things you have to think of and keep in mind when you prosecute other crimes. Murder, obviously, way harder. So it's easy to find. It's out there. Drugs are out there. And now it's really easy to prosecute. So that becomes the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, for anyone who wants to go and make a name for themselves. Because stats matter in police work. And drug stats are a really common way of using a barometer or a testing to say, hey, are you a go-getter cop? Are you a cop that could make it in another unit? Like a proactive unit that's all they do is drug street stuff. Or you want to be a detective in a further level. You start and do narcotics detective work. And then say you want to be a homicide detective, or you want to be major crimes, or you want to get part of any sort of task force for anything, you make your name in drug enforcement. You want to be on a SWAT team, show that you're a go-getter. A lot of SWAT warrants, especially historically, were based on narcotics enforcement. You prove yourself in your drug enforcement. What can you do on your street rip? What kind of a go-getter are you? Just in general, promotions, just be able to say that, hey, I'm a proactive, I go and do my own thing. The only way you can generally be proactive on a day-to-day basis for a patrol officer is to do drug enforcement. And most of the warrants you're looking for are people who have warrants for drugs. Or if it's a minor warrant, like you're looking at something like it's just a driving while license suspended type thing, then again, you're going to be just looking towards drug stuff, because the whole reason you're going to do that is so you can get in their car and find drugs, which is, again, it's a felony. The other common thing why all that's being enforced so much is because it's all felony level stuff. If we're talking about, the cocaines and the sort of bigger drugs. Now, we're not talking about marijuana, we're talking about pills, we're not talking about even like, some stuff that's not as enforced as much, like your LSD, your psilocybins, and that sort of stuff. A lot of those were sort of lower enforced anyways back in the day. So we've got it. Go-getter cop, they want to find their name, make their name, it's through drug enforcement. The other thing is, it's really active and fun. A lot of people like to run when you go do drug enforcement. A lot of people, and they got like warrants for stuff, because again, the reason they run is because you have something in your pocket that you're not supposed to have. And if they catch you, it's going to be really easy to, prove that crime, because it is, again, a per se thing. It's by law that you have it. It's then illegal. So you want to build up these stats, you want to do a promotion thing, you're doing all these things toward this. So what's wrong with all this? Is any of this based on what's good for society? Is any of this based on what is going to, prevent people from overdosing, prevent people from breaking into more cars to support their drug habit, all that? No, when you enforce drug laws this way, it actually creates more problems for someone to make them more likely to then commit property crimes. So I'm with you. I don't want someone using drugs and breaking into my car or my house, selling that stuff that they stole to support a drug habit. I think we all pretty much universally agree. Hell, even people in the drug game don't like it when other people go do that shit. That's pretty much universal. We don't want that to happen. But by over-enforcing drugs from a possession or even a distribution standpoint, we're putting people in a hardship. We're putting them in a position where they're now going to commit those crimes, as opposed to, hey, we're enforcing drug laws, we're going to prevent that. No, it doesn't work. People, you put them in prison, they don't get clean. You go and you arrest them for these things. You get an 18-year-old to 25-year-old, their first drug crime. They're not getting off drugs because you put them in prison, okay? You're not putting them in a hardship. I'm not excusing any sort of action or anything like this, but this is just the facts of the matter. You're putting them in a position of hardship. So they're going to cost some money. Getting arrested, going to prison costs a lot of money. Being in prison or on probation is a very expensive place to be. You can get into that whole lecture on prison reform and how unethical you've got systems like JPay and all that, Securus, that are pretty much fucking people over. For all the families, these poor families, working class families that have people in prison, they're spending hundreds, if not $1,000 a month easily just to talk to their loved one and to have just a basic level of like communication with their family member. It is so expensive to do that. So just for possession, we're putting people in those type of situations. It is very detrimental on society in that sense. You're having a lot of people that went from being like barely holding by, you know, they're doing some stuff, but they're keeping a job, to now once you get them in the system, and now once you've placed them where they're now a felon for a drug crime, and there's a lot of connotations to a felon for a drug crime that you don't get for a convicted felon for other crimes. There are specific funding things you can never get through the federal government if you have a drug crime, but isn't applicable if you have, say, like me. I don't have any drug felonies. I have aggravated assault. I can go and apply for a Pell Grant and get a Pell Grant and still go to college if I wanted to. Kid that goes and gets a possession with intent, distribution of narcotics, anything like that, yeah, they're never going to be eligible for that. There are big impacts on them going to college. So cool, let's make it harder for someone to go get an education because they have a drug crime. There's a lot of stuff in the war on drugs that's perpetuated for many, many years now that has really led to this shithole situation for people, and it just makes things harder and harder for them. Let's not forget that age of 18 to 25, you've got people who have the most plasticity in their brain issues. They're the most malleable and the most, I guess I'd say, susceptible to being influenced by this. You think like the little kid stuff I get? No, it's that 18 to 25-year-old, especially we're talking males here, primarily the ones that go to prison for drug crimes, go to prison in general, is in that age range, and those who we like to get felonies to and put in prison. When you do that, however, you go from the person who's maybe a user, you know, not in the game, so to speak, and now they're in that system. Well, guess who's just learning how to be a better criminal? They might have been committing other crimes. They might not have been doing property crimes, not been doing identity thefts or anything like that, or violent crimes. They're just using drugs. They got caught with drugs, and now they're going to prison. You know, maybe it's possession with intent to deliver, something along those lines. So you do all that. Now this person is getting taught. Now this person's culture is now they're culturally a felon. Because I'm culturally a felon myself. After 5 years in prison, that is a culture I identify with. There's no other way to, you know, put it. That is what sounds very familiar. There's a common part when you're around other felons. You start talking about, I shouldn't just say felons, like convicts. People are actually been to prison, walked the main line, not just been to a camp, been part of a card. I can explain all these terms for other people that don't understand, but most people who have been to prison or have family members know what I'm talking about. And there's a big difference when you do that if you just go to camp or you just get a felony and you go do probation. And that's a big difference why I went that route. Not intentionally why, but a big difference in what I know now and why I'm glad I went that route, to actually have that full experience, knowing the difference of what it's like to be a convict versus actually going just through the system and actually having a, you know, felony on your record. So when you learn that, you come that, now you have this person who's getting out of prison, because it's probably a pretty short prison sentence for your first drug one like that, but they've just been taught by these guys, you know, 10, 15 years older than them. They're on their 5th, 6th, 7th prison bit. That's who they look up to. That's their peer group. That's who's influencing their behavior. And now you just put them out there as like real criminals. Now they know how to commit those property crimes, know how to do better violent crimes. You're angry. You're pissed off at the world. Certainly at authority figures like the DOC, your guards, and all that stuff. There's a bunch of anger built up. So you've got a crime that really shouldn't be a crime. You've got something that's being enforced that's just making it worse. You've got people now influenced and taught to be better criminals. And you can kind of see where this perpetual cycle is just getting worse and worse and worse. And it hasn't gotten better. There's no like, I never was like, I did drug enforcement for 4 years straight as a detective. And there's never like, oh man, that guy stopped drugs. Man, I really saved addiction today. No. I didn't stop property crime. Didn't stop any, houses from getting burglarized. No less identity theft happened in that city. There's really nothing. It did nothing. Is really boils down to. Absolutely nothing. It's like, cool. Doing something that's getting, people get shot at, get killed, just in the game between law enforcement and the folks doing it. Dealer to dealer, user to dealer, all that stuff. People are constantly dying in the war on drugs daily. For what? Like, it did nothing. 13 years in law enforcement total, SWAT raids, all this kind of stuff. Again, did nothing. No less people are addicted to drugs. No less people are dying of overdose. No less families have to, not go to bed tonight because they don't know what their son or daughter is doing out there. whether they're going to live or die. Nothing changed in all of that. All that money spent on drug enforcement. We can get an asset forfeiture. I'll talk about that one time. Well, more than one time. There's a lot to say on it, but in like the series of videos I'm putting out there, they'll be the paid series. Really going to talk about the in-depth on an undercover drug deal, how it happens, why it's so unethical, the very specific details of what do they have to call, what do they have to say, what does the CI have to do, how to spot a CI, how to spot an undercover, all that stuff. But I'll also talk about asset forfeiture and how everyone thinks asset forfeiture, oh yeah, cool, we're going to, take all these money from all these drug kingpins and stuff. Now, I've done a $6 million Caesar. I did, numerous $100,000 here, $10,000, all that kind of stuff, taking vehicles from people who were obviously that was coming from drug proceeds. That's what we think it's all going to go for. And cool, that's what's buying like those armored cars and shit like that. But really, what the fact of the matter is, no, most money from asset forfeiture is coming from poor minority communities or just poor white trash communities, stuff like that. It's all coming from there. You're getting $500 here and there out of someone's pocket. You're getting, the $1,500 car. We had saw a lot more $2,500 cars than we did $25,000 cars. Even the $600,000 Maserati or something like that. That was an exception, not the rule, by all means. So day in day out, it's coming from poor communities. And it's coming from communities that can't fight it. You get $500 seized from you, even 2 hours of attorney at $300 an hour, you're a net zero. So you have no way to defend yourself. And then if you did, you go yourself to these hearings. In the state of Washington, it's called you have a hearings examiner that will hear these. Now, under Washington state law for asset forfeiture, as it pertains to narcotics, which is actually different than if it pertained to another felony. A certain felony, if you seize something under that, it's really strict. Like if something was used in the commission of another, say like a bank robbery, and you want to take a vehicle that was used, it's really hard to do. Now drugs, oh yeah, he drove in that car and he sold that person drugs. Yeah, you can take that person's car. And technically by law, it doesn't matter if it was theirs or not. You take mom's car, you take aunt's car, all that stuff. Because the reason is because most people don't put it in their name, so they would just go and say, "Oh yeah, that was my car." And by Washington state law, you can still seize it. So yeah, I would not lend someone a car in Washington state because they will seize your shit. And all you have to do to fight that is it doesn't go through any sort of real good checks and balance. We're not talking about this goes to a judge or a jury or anything like that. It goes to what your department. So say if it's a police department, they're just going to have, like maybe a municipal hearings examiner do it. Sheriff's office, and they're wilding out there. They actually have one of their own employees, a lieutenant often, is their own hearing examiner. So it's like, yeah, did Detective Doe and Detective Frank do right? Yeah, my boys did good. Next one. That's about what you have to go against for your hearing. So don't think that those hearings they're a real due process based in Washington, because it's just a preponderance of evidence. There is no probable cause. It's basically just probable cause. I mean, there is no beyond a reasonable doubt standard. It's just was it more likely than not that this person used this asset in the commission of any sort of felony related to narcotics. And if it's true, then that asset's taken. Now, is it most of the time was it used for drugs? Yeah, it probably was. Is it one of those things that more likely than not? Yeah, it probably is. But there are times, because everyone always just say it's mom's rent or it was for grandma's, medical bills. And more likely than not, was it bullshit? Probably. But then again, every once in a while, even unknowingly, you probably were taking mom's rent. And even if it was used from drugs, you just took someone's rent money. And what's that $500 going to buy in the grand scheme of things? So back to the original point is distrust in communities. So why are we getting more distrust in communities? Well, look at asset forfeiture we just talked about. Look at the fact we're putting away people's kids. Look at the fact we're killing people's kids. There's violence. And then it's proactively done. So you see police coming in the neighborhood. They're not coming in to save you. They may be coming in to kick in your fucking door because they think your son's selling drugs. So it just becomes very bristly, very, just a kind of icky feeling and just like, oh shit, police are here. Oh. And that's where that kind of response from the police and relief. Because that's what it should be. Fucking police should come there and it should be one of those things that like, okay, cool, they're here. But who really says that? I mean, even your average square bears aren't real thrilled when the police are walking through their, say, apartment complex building. They're kind of like, because then, I mean, we get into traffic enforcement, you can get in that kind of stuff. Other less than pleasant areas of law enforcement that need to change. So there are more ways we can depth in this. I'll talk more in an upcoming episode about just the negative perception of law enforcement being due to the war on drugs more. But just for this live, that's kind of what that little theme was here. I appreciate everyone who listened. Kind of surprised I got all four streaming platforms at once, and it didn't fail on any of them. So I had Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. I don't know if I'll always do all those. That was a little experiment here, but I definitely TikTok's the easiest one for me. I can slap a phone in and get it going, but also try and put events up there if I'm going to do it on, like the meta platforms there, and then certainly YouTube's always one that's there because the YouTube channels really want everyone to subscribe to. If you're doing the podcast thing, please, any of the platforms, it can be even YouTube now and TikTok have it, but please subscribe. Spotify, and Apple, Google, Amazon, any of those ones if you podcast do there. But please, please, please get on the YouTube channel and we can bump our subscribers up. So thanks, and shoot me any questions if I'm here as well. You